DESE today. I know he has an official title and he'll share that with you, but I think he's the guru of all things curriculum and assessment. Um, he is here today to share with us information about the high school testlets that got released in, I believe, right before Thanksgiving. And so we're happy that he's here today to provide us with an overview and your opportunity to ask him some questions about those high school testlets. This will be much like the session we held over the 3 through 8 testlets earlier in the year. So maybe we could just really quickly, could we take a moment and just introduce who's on the call? I'm Sue Herrera. I'm the Director of Instructional Development at Step Up. And whoever wants to go next, please feel free.
I'm Robert Bowers, Lathrop High School principal.
Brian Duffy, Wright City Data Coordinator.
I'm Jocelyn Schluss, the Assistant Superintendent at Montgomery County.
I'm Amber Kennard. I'm the elementary principal and the SPED director at Lamont.
Kate McDowell, curriculum director at KC International Academy.
Lisa Hartley, curriculum director at St. James R1 School District.
Rebecca Kessler, Step Up consultant.
I'm Valerie Montgomery from Step Up.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rail, also a Step Up consultant and trainer.
I'm Lindsay Bond and I'm with Step Up.
All righty. Thank you so much for taking time to introduce yourself. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shaun because I know he has a lot to share with us.
I'm totally blank. Good morning, everybody. Shaun Bates, Standards Curriculum and Assessment Coordinator. Lifelong person for many of you now. Been here almost 20 years. So, I do get to be the department historian. And if you can't get it answered somewhere on the floor, they probably push it over to my office and see what I can do for you. So, again, thank you for all you guys do. So to really kind of jump into this, I don't have any slides. DRC did a slide show for the district test coordinators. I can kind of show you where that's at. But to really just kind of talk about the testlets themselves. So I think that's the most important piece. Just to kind of give you a background, if you're not familiar with the word testlets, it's not like the alternate assessment. It is, but we use that term for what we produced. The testlets are very granular for math and science and social studies. We really do look at almost a standard in a lens of itself. For ELA, it's a little bit different just because of the nature of the standards. You really just can't do a full passage and measure one standard. You can really measure a lot of standards. So it's very traditional about what you would see in any product that you probably have or even the state assessment. But for the other three content areas, we really did try to drill down to kind of specific standard. Some of them were difficult standards or standards that we noticed within the assessment data itself that, struggle. We also wanted to give multiple views. This is a lot of questions that we get from your educators about, my kiddos do really good on a multiple choice. If we just had a sample of what a constructive response question may look like if they saw it, or drag and drop, or, one of the matching, so we combed through our item bank and tried to put together some items that gave a good picture of the standards, also from the rigor. You have some easy or items that you would quote unquote call easier. I really call those most answered items correctly to, the least correctly answered. And then it does go up the learning progression and looking at the rigor and the expectations of how students should respond. Just as we all know that big term of DOK, where you actually know it, can recall it, but can you actually synthesize it or apply it? So we tried to do our best to look at items that we could use and release to you as the districts. To kind of give you a real quick background, these are behind secure doors. We put them into DRC's system. They are sitting in DRC's behind their secure portal. We've already had a company have our product out there in their system. And, and we found out that it was a district who gave it to them. They wanted it in their online platform, and never realized that they had broken the copyright. The district didn't give them the front pages, everything that had our copyrights on there, and just gave them the rest of the materials and said put it in. But it was already starting to be on their public website. And we had to have a conversation with them. You don't own these items and you can't return around. So this is why we're kind of keeping it a little bit secure on that. These items would probably never show up in an operational test, but we also do this where we've talked about our practice forms. We've got a full release practice form, and then we've got a secure practice form. And again, that came about many years ago from principals about the data that you're looking at, you're combing through, and I just go back to prior to COVID, a district principal was just chewing me out. The spring scores come in, they did horrible, but yet he showed me all of their practice form tests and they were nearly perfect. Well, if you're teaching those test items over and over and over, kids look really good, but do they really know the standards? So this is why we kind of said, let's produce a secure one that really isn't a biased view when you're looking at your data. Do the kids really know the standards versus knowing questions? So, this is where we also kind of keep it a little bit behind the scenes on there. And I'll kind of go into a little bit deeper talk about some of the testlets and how to use them or how you perceive them. But I always give a caution when you're looking at that data, just remember how they were used. If they were completely taught, I always worry about the data anymore, because you can teach kids the items and how to jump through the hoops. Talking about in math, we could teach the kids the method all day long, but do they really understand the mathematics behind it and can apply it? And how does this relate to next year or the following year's standards is always questionable. So we always want to be careful about, is it really the assessment driving the instruction, or is it supporting the instruction? And so, you'll hear us quite a bit from the curriculum office and our office about use of these. So again, with the testlets, the design was really about openness to you as a district. We have them online, which are very quick. It's not the quickest process, and I will fully admit it. We're still working with DRC on how to do this better. Another one is we still got to get a good API system to be able to collect your data and get it into the DRC system. It's the registering and rostering of kids that's, I think, the most detrimental piece of this whole thing. But on that note, the testlets are online. They could go right in. You could assign them. Kids test. All machine score. The data comes back real quickly. Any constructive response, the teachers could score. And that's fine and simple, but I know that a lot of time and effort is always into about putting those kids onto that type of assessment when you've got more instruction going on and just screen time and all these things that you've got to do and prep tickets. So, the other idea is we have these in PDF form. The teachers, you can download them. We definitely say share them. Again, the only ask is just don't put them on your public website, that somebody could grab and use. Because some of these, and I failed to mention earlier, some of these, especially for like reading, we have secured a contract with the author. So we have that copyright for all the way to 2030. So that's another reason why, we expected this, how many usages of this, how many copies. So the author is getting their compensation for their work. When it gets out in the public, then it becomes that their public domain or gets used that way. And then the author may come back and pull our rights to use their product. So again, we try not to commission work. We try to actually use professional work, work that's been out, has been vetted, and is not something that's on the fly. So we really do use published work in almost all of our assessment products. So on that note, talking about the PDF usage, again, I've talked to teachers, talked to conferences, especially with the 3 through 8, if you were on earlier this year, they have a good purpose. Again, using all of the Tesla, is it the most beneficial thing? It's just like the practice form. Do you really need to give that practice form in the full breadth? I don't think so. I think it served its purpose many years ago to get an idea of what the full test would look like. But again, when you're doing this, especially the testlets is a much easier process because you could go right through and say, hey, I need testlet number 4 in algebra 1. We just taught this part of the standard about inequalities. It's perfect. It's very narrow. So it could be very beneficial, but are all the items beneficial? That's up for the teacher to tell me, and I really do appreciate the teacher saying, I didn't need the easier items. I've done that enough with my kiddos. I just need these 3 top items. Can I just test on that? Well, that's where probably say online isn't probably the best. Pull that testlet apart, take them apart, use that item in your own assessment if you're typing them up. Or use them as bell ringers, and have them as part of your talking through the math, or talking through science, or just talking through the items themselves. That's what I definitely see the vision of using these items to support your instruction. And how you've taught, where are the kids really at? You've got a good item, and I say they're good items because these are items not developed by a vendor. These are all Missouri educator developed. So your peers developed all of these items. And, I say that quite often about which companies should districts look at to go get test items, because they want to mirror the state assessments. And I'm like, I'd be careful because they're not vetted by Missouri educators. They're not vetted by the standards themselves and really the vetting of the rigor. They could say it's difficult, but is it really rigorous? The old Jeopardy question. Final Jeopardy is a very hard question, but it is a recall question. So, some of these items are difficult. I would even say some of these items really do lend themselves to implementing and then having conversations to really dive into, especially some of the science questions in biology. You'll see a few of those in the 8th grade science is really diving into and having the conversations with the kids and really start thinking or learning about their thinking process. Where are they at? Have they really put everything together, or are there just pieces that are just showing up and they're being able to pop some things, but they don't see the bigger picture? So definitely this is how I would envision. The vision was, to have something very simple that can kick out scores and data, because I know you need that quickly. But then there's also a lot of your back in the classroom and really doing the full rigorous instruction and having those moments of conversation. And I really don't want to say formative. And you'll hear that from me. So I apologize. I've started to coin a new phrase. Formative, when we all started, was really about asking the questions of the kids and getting feedback, but now it's more about, computerized assessments. So I really have now just coined the phrase that we use, informative questioning, and really diving in there and using these items in that perspective. So they're very open to you, tear them apart as you see fit. For high school, especially for mathematics, and I would say any of the content areas, except for government, I apologize, we don't have any social studies in the elementary or middle school testlets. But for the other 3 content areas is when those kiddos, and you got freshmen, sophomore, juniors who are struggling, it may be a good time for those teachers to start looking at the learning progression to maybe that standard they were working on, and you gave that testlet and they didn't do very well. And start looking at that learning progression and regressing back to where the foundations were laid. And I'm really thinking about the inequalities in Algebra 1. Where does that really start? It starts in grade 6 in the EEI. Equations, equalities, and inequalities, or expressions, sorry. And really start looking at that and maybe start pulling some of those testlets. Again, these are not, they're bound by the standard, but definitely think about, as we're wanting to do that tier 2 and tier 3 support, is not just trying to teach that standard again and hit it harder, is probably we need to go find the foundations. And that goes back into the ELA, thinking about the writing process or the reading process, and just going back and pulling some of those, if you've got a freshman who's a struggling reader, going back 2 or 3 grades or 2 grades and really getting that passage and working through that passage with the kiddo and thinking about the standards and how they build. And especially with the ELA, remember, 6 through 12 are nearly the identical standards. It's the text complexity that keeps building and building and building, and then you're adding vocabulary or you're adding more about how you look at theme and the differences of theme and how it progresses, but it's still just building on the complexity. So I think you'll have some good text that you could use to work with those kiddos, and you have those standards are well aligned. It's just about the rigor and then building on the rigor. The same thing with science. I think you could definitely go down into the middle school and start looking at those life skills foundation standards. That's where we start introducing and continuing with photosynthesis, and thinking about physical science word energy. So I think a lot of those can really pair themselves together. So you do have a larger pool to probably work from, whereas the lower elementary doesn't really have. Unless they got kids who are accelerated, then you can definitely use them as an acceleration point too, if you've worked with them, and then you can pull that. But I think from a high school perspective, we've got the 4 core assessments that we know, and I hate to say that part of that was funding. We've had a few requests for Algebra 2. We're definitely looking at that before we got on here and Sue started recording, but it's recordable. We've got to watch what the budgets are going to come from. From our legislature. How much of funding do we get our continued funding, or do we start getting cuts into our funding? Which means that it cuts our assessment program, and there are set accounts that we know that we'll consistently spend, and then there's always a little bit of cushion there where we could do some side projects, the testlets being side projects. So hopefully we'll maybe have the funds to maybe do Algebra 2. We'll definitely know by late April if we will be there, and then we can start building them and hopefully have them by Thanksgiving of next year or this year. But more to come on that. But that's, again, still based on funding. But with the high school, again, I think you've got a lot of opportunity to go back and pull those testlets. And I know teachers probably say, well, that's 8th grade stuff and I don't teach it. It is your foundations. It is the complete foundations of where you're at, which is an activity that I also want to kind of throw at you guys to think about with the testlets. Susan and our curriculum coordinator up on the 11th floor in OCCR, we've been recommending this with the testlets, and especially maybe your newer teachers or some of your teachers who are coming in from alternate backgrounds who may not have the full breadth of, the pre-service that we have. They're certified to teach math, but to really understand students' thinking and understanding the standards. An activity you may want to do this summer with PD, and do this with your own assessments or maybe some of these other things, is to really give them the items, and that's it. Have them score or take the test, which identify if they can really get the right answer or not. But then also align those items, and do this with the practice forms too. Can they really align that item to the standard that it was assessing? Because then they really begin to understand the standard itself, and how is this where the kiddo's thinking process and what they need to think about. It's an activity we've done many years here at the department with educators with NAEP items. And it's interesting. You can get 5 different perspectives, especially with the old GLEs. You get 5 different perspectives of an item. How is this really aligned? What is it really aligned to? What is it really measuring? And then, really kind of start thinking about, especially multiple choice, or, maybe even some of the drag and drops, or, when you've got multiple answers visible for you to see, why are the kids choosing the incorrect response? Start kind of thinking about what is the distractor really measuring? It's measuring this misconception, and then you start thinking about, okay, I keep seeing this misconception coming up in my classroom. Is it me? 30 years in there, boy, I know I've weaved some misconceptions in there unintentionally trying to do that. Just how I explained it or how I went through it too quickly and kids got a misconception. But also, again, from the high school perspective, is looking at when are these misconceptions introduced? And then I think this gives you a good starting point to start talking about articulating your curricula, thinking about the vocabulary. And again, I know this is a hard point a lot of times when you're talking about curricula and academic vocabulary. And, as I'm an elementary teacher, so I take it right here on the chin. Sometimes we don't use those big words or use those words because the kiddos are not ready. Apparently, we say that they're not ready for these words, but we need to be using them. We sit there and say the answer. We really should be using some very early in the kid's career, and difference, and product and divisor or dividend, quotient. Those simple little terms, I know a lot of people say we shouldn't, or, they're too hard for the kids. We're not assessing them on if they know those words, but we need to keep introducing those words and, using them consistently over and over and over, that it builds into the repertoire. And so when it does really become, okay, now you have to know when I say some, or you have to know the product, or you have to know this, that the kiddo is right on track and it's not just something you're introducing. So that really helps, I think, start articulating your instruction, the expectations. And it really helps, I think, the elementary perspective about, you're a fifth grade teacher. You're really not responsible for fifth grade. You are responsible for the curriculum in here, but you are setting the foundations until this kid graduates. You are part of that kid's life. You are part of their learning. You're part of the whole team. Is like we all want to say, and the kiddos can really move up and continue to retain that knowledge and be able to apply that and be successful in the high school, where we see a lot of that. And again, kudos to a lot of people who talk about, the kiddos in high school, they struggle, but really look how these kids graduate. These teachers, the high school teachers, do a great job. You're building on everything. And we need to remind those elementary and middle school teachers, when you lay good foundations, those high school teachers are so successful. And it's not just them, it is the whole district is successful. And that's what I always look at when I'm looking at test scores, not just a grade. I really try to look at how the whole progression and where these kids are moving. But, definitely with these testlets, we want you to use them as you definitely see fit. How you use them, again, like I said, it's up to you. I really think a lot of it is breaking apart what's useful, what's not useful. I would say, though, I would probably lean more to the constructive response questions. Those are the most difficult for our kiddos, or those are ones that they skip. But it's, in my perspective, of 30 years watching when the map first started coming out, and a lot of people say, well, SPED kids really struggle. We don't measure, or when we grade those, those constructive response, we're not looking for perfect. We're looking, can the kid hit the elements? Can the kid tell me about that piece of content? In science, I don't care about structure. I don't care about spelling. We try to do it all to really find it. And it's such a diamond in the rough a lot of times when you parse through everything that the kid's done. They really know this. And I know that's different. Classroom expectations, you want more polished, more refined, especially if you're working on that. But remember, for an on-demand assessment, is really give that confidence that kids tell them what you know, try to be as clear as possible. If it's muddy, it's muddy. They will work through that.
Shaun, would we be at a stopping point soon where we could ask some questions?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I know I have a burning question. So how was it determined which standards warranted a testlet? Because we noticed that not every standard aligns to a testlet question.
Like I said, we kind of went through some of the data. Where were standards that kiddos were not scoring as well?
Okay.
So we kind of, okay, this standard looks like we're struggling a little bit. And, and everybody's going to sit there and say, for government, really, the three branches, you would not believe how difficult those kiddos. And again, this is where I would probably kind of reflect real quickly for anybody that's interested in the government testlet. Knows that they're a constructive response on the three branches. Those kiddos absolutely are atrocious on those. They know the three branches, and we're not trying to ask questions that I know can get into some political conflict, but really about what is the true purpose of the three branches and the checks and balances, or what are they really monitoring? And it's very difficult. And I know kiddos are struggling right now with our current state of the stage or state of the nation. And sometimes kiddos say, well, the executive power writes laws. No, they don't. They may think they can, and pass a few things, but really they don't. It's Congress, the legislative branches, where law comes from, and then the courts determine if the law is constitutional or not. And then the executive power enforces the law. It is really interesting how they don't even know how to address a lot of those questions. Or, thinking about the Supreme Court case and how that really relates to the three branches, I think there's one of those items in there about how they were talking about overstepping. So, I think that those are where kiddos really struggle, and people get surprised. Well, we've been teaching the three branches since fourth grade. You're absolutely correct. We do a really good job about identifying the three branches and who it is, the president, Congress, and judges. But that's really what they don't know. Anything after that, they don't know. So we looked at that. You'd be surprised. Again, for the algebra, we've kind of looked at some of the standards where the kiddos are struggling. And that goes same thing with the grade level. We kind of really looked at what were some of the stumbling blocks for kiddos in the standards.
Okay, thank you so much. Other questions?
You had said that the testlets were available in PDF form, and I know with the 3rd through 8th grade ones that there was a cover sheet with a scoring guide. Is that available for the high school ones as well?
Almost. It should be coming here either by the end of this week or first of next week. It's getting harder and harder with all the WCAG and the 508 compliance. Even though they're behind secure doors, we have to make every PDF, everything web accessibility compliant. So it's taking more time when we get it produced and then getting it over to DRC and their production team to make them as compliant as possible, just in case of a lawsuit. So the team finally finished up what they wanted to see in there. So it is in the last strains. I'm hoping by Friday. If it's not Friday, it'll be early next week that all of the scoring got to be there for the end of course. So speaking on that, the Braille and large print, we'll have large print available, I think, by the end of the month. I'll air quote that one. The Braille is falling behind. We contract that out with American Publishing House. They're only one of 2 Brailling companies left, really. So it got pushed back as a few states are rebuilding their assessment system. So they're needing Braille forms. So they got pushed ahead of us. So it is a little bit further behind. So we're probably looking, I think, April when we'll have a Braille ready file. That is, if you've got an embosser in the district, it's that it'll fall into where you can always print those at any time or emboss those for your kiddos. We haven't produced physical Braille just because of the nature of how they're being used and trying to think about shipping and all of that. So we're really going to a Braille ready file. There is talk. Again, I don't know enough about the state of the state. I'm working with the Braille group later this week, this Thursday and Friday, to do a final review of our spring forums. So I'll kind of have another conversation about them of where the state is and the LEAs are with refreshable Braille. So, the system would have a refreshable Braille module where the kiddos can have that. That I know that's quite expensive for the districts, and it is a difficult process for kiddos to master that. It takes them a while, even longer than I think even learning Braille is trying to get that, because it's a running stream of embossment that goes running through their fingers.
Any other questions from leaders on the call for Shaun?
I do have one question, not totally related to high school, but are the testlets going to be continued to be developed over time, or like once these are done, they're kind of done for a while? We've really appreciated having the additional release questions, and our teachers are getting a lot out of them.
It kind of goes back to earlier. It's all about funding. Do we have the available funds? The other one, though, for grade level, I think it's even more difficult because most of you are probably aware, we got the IADA and start looking at building this new assessment system for 2930, which is more about a through assessment system, which means we'll have to have an adaptive engine, which means now I need about 1,800 items per grade per content. So we would have a lot of item writing and probably not an opportunity to release items. So I'm not sure if we can actually probably add any more at this moment. I will say, from the curriculum perspective, is they're trying to figure out how maybe to get LEAs together, and if we can create a bank where districts could pull just items out and create their own testlets. So they wouldn't be in a computer system, but they would be housed in like maybe our box where our Moleat blocks are, or maybe even a Google folder if somebody wants to house that. But again, the only issue with that is they probably wouldn't be fully vetted unless we could train teachers really think about the vetting process. Is this bias, or is this really doing what the item should be doing? That's where the power of when we can release that. They have gone through item writing, they've gone through a content and bias review. Most of the items have all been field tested. And so we've got some pretty good data and statistics behind some of these items. Some of the constructive response we have not field tested, but we felt like that they were strong, and we release those. We are hoping that we can get samples to build more scoring packets for the teachers, so they can get more visuals of how students respond to what a 3 and a 2 and a 1 is, and the variances of what 3s are. There's always the high 3, low 3. So we definitely want to work on that, but so much of this is dependent upon budgets. And then the other is trying to get teachers out of the classroom, and that is the hardest thing since sliced bread and COVID. Is trying to get you guys to release them, and we absolutely understand why you don't want to. It is such a critical component now of them being in the classroom with those kids. Every minute is so crucial anymore.
Yes. Okay. Final moments.
Don't work.
Right. Yep. Any other thoughts or questions? Everyone know how to find everything they need to find with the testlets? Anyone need Shaun to drop anything in the link that would guide them to the direct spot?
I have no idea how to find these testlets. I've looked all over the place.
Okay.
Okay. So
DESE has a way of making everything pretty complicated to find.
Well, as I said, I needed these to be secure. So these are residing in DRC's Insight. And again, with this being student data driven, I am required to only assign one person. So we always assign the district testing coordinator as that person to contact. So I know you guys get frustrated. Hey, I need access to, the EOC spring tests or whatever. We put all the onus back on your testing coordinator to assign those rights. And again, I apologize, but it becomes very clear about PII. We're so nervous about any type of student information getting released inadvertently or posted. And I just kind of remind you guys that you're on here. Please don't have your teachers email the kid's name and MOSIS number to us. Our email is sunshineable. I mean, they would block it, but it becomes very apparent that student information has been released through a public email system. So that kind of gets tough, itchy. But your district testing coordinator, get a hold of them, say, hey, I need EOC testlets for 25-26. They'll go into your account, click on there, you have full access rights, and then you'll be able to see that. It's within the drop-down menu. Now I think I can share this and show that. Whoops, let me log in. All right, let me see if I can share. Where's the share button on?
Down at the bottom.
There it is. Oh, I hate when I do this. Anybody else have this issue when you finally look at when you share and then you find out that you actually have 50 windows open?
And you don't know which one you need?
Yeah. There you go. I'm embarrassed. Does it really show that? Here we go. So you should see my insight screen.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, your district testing coordinator, I kind of look like them. You've got WIDA. So you'll went on the Missouri Educator. You'll click on that. And then under my applications, we would just go to general information. And then let's go to documents. And then when your testing coordinator has set this up for you, when you have those rights, you'll see quite a few options in your dropdown. And again, for the high school principals, high school people, I would ask for grade level 2. Again, you heard me say this earlier, I definitely think you could drop down into 6 through 8 and probably pull some good testlets for any of those kiddos who are struggling. So you really maybe find that boundary, especially for, I talk about mathematics quite often. The EEI standards in 6 through 8, I think, are so crucial for any of the kids' mastery of Algebra 1. If they can get that ratio and proportions, it really sets them up for success in high school math. Think about your high school science. How much of the science is built on ratio and proportion? If they really got that understood and mastered, I think you see a lot more success with those kiddos as they move forward. But you'll see, excuse me, the EOC testlets. Click on that. You can click on all and it'll give you quite a bit. You do have the options of just looking down and going for test forms. So that's very specific. And that'll give you the 4 PDFs right there. And then like as the question was a little bit earlier about scoring guides, those will start populating in there, but hopefully by the end of this week or the very first of next week. Again, sir, I apologize, but again, with any type of student information, our portal for here, we have one point of contact, and then we allow that district testing coordinator to identify whoever needs it. You can assign that. Is back on the onus of the school itself to remember about the personal identifiable information.
I wanted to ask a question. I'm on the DRC Insight portal now. So when I click on the tab that says test practice, And then there's a link down at the bottom that says like portal.te.drcedirect.com. So I click on that. I go to map end of course. Then there's like 4 things you can sign into. It says practice, summative, testlets, writing prompt pilot. What is that? What if I click on testlets, it says I don't have access to sign into this test, but who has access to that and where does it take you?
So that's just going to be, it really shouldn't be that. Well, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
So the web version is not going to be active for those kiddos. You will need the Insight platform. This is more about how to work with parents, maybe what they see. It does not allow that. It's more about a visual for everyone to know what that looks like without having to log into the system. Also, if you're training teachers, if you are like, hey, here's how we're going to get into the summative assessments. Here's how we get to practice. How do we get to testlets? So if you didn't want to actually log into Insight and try to do that in any type of your training, you can use this web version on that. Now for the practice, that one should have been open. I need to go look at that. But the writing prompt pilot, that one will come off. It needs to come off. That finished up in December. But that is the web version. If you're ever doing anything that's going to be live and capturing student information, you'll want to actually use the Insight icon that's on the students' machines. I would say the biggest one is more about the Insight training and using those online tools. And again, that's probably more for the younger ones. The older ones, I would probably say you might want to remind them, or especially for math, if they don't have their calculator or if they don't have a physical calculator, there's calculators built into the Desmos calculator, which is a free tool for the districts to use. They may want to get comfortable with Desmos. Again, we're not calculator police yet. That is probably coming with some of the innovations that are coming out of some of the calculators with a bunch of apps built into them. But definitely look at the tools, thinking about the tools in ELA, that there is a small dictionary and how to use that. I see more kiddos once they understand the dictionary online versus using a big book or the big dictionary, because they can't have that during the writing process. It's very strange how many EOC writings I sit through each spring, and maybe a handful of kids actually use the thesaurus and the dictionary. Now, I do see a few more kids using the online dictionary. So it may be good to have them at least refresh them that there is a dictionary available for them to use if they got stuck on a word.
So just to make sure I understand, the only way for students to practice the testlets is paper pencil. There's no way to do them online so they get used to testing on the computer like they are the ELC.
You do it online through the Insight app that's on the kids' machines.
Okay, so they can do
not the web version.
Okay, so we can get it set up to where they can practice those testlets on their machines.
Yes.
Okay.
That will be a little bit of a lift for the testing coordinator. And again, that is something that's very frustrating, and I absolutely understand. They are separate data sets, so they would need to upload the kids and then put them into the testlet. The nice thing about the testlet, the tickets stay the same for all of them. So that is a good thing for that. So you won't have to worry about reprinting or printing. But they do have to put them in there. And then once they get into then the kids can open up Insight, give them a test ticket, and they can go and use that.
Okay, so the testing coordinator gets the kids set up, and then they have access to it in the classroom. Teachers have nothing to do with this, correct?
It depends on how you want to. You can give teachers rights.
Okay.
So they can't load kids, but the DTC can load the kids, but then the teachers could have access to the rosters and the test tickets. Okay. So they can say, hey, I'm instructing, we're going to go ahead and just let somebody know, we're going to do Testlet 5 today. So that goes in there, and you can, as a district, you can assign either to see the data or not see the data. We've had more requests, and I don't know why. Some districts want all the data to go to the front office, and then they'll give it to the teachers. Some districts let the teachers have full access the minute it's available versus anybody holding the data. So we leave that open to how the district wants to do that. We don't want to intercede in the chain of command.
All right. Thank you.
Shaun, when you talked to us about the 3rd through 8th grade testlets, you had said that you kind of watched the frequency, not big brothering it, just out of interest, the frequency of school districts that used the testlets and how they use them. And I remember you saying that schools that just, went over and over and over and over and did the test in its entirety didn't really see any lift. But those that kind of did it like laps, where you did just give it as a formative once you taught something, and that the teacher actually used it as a teaching tool, that there was more lift in the scores. Is that true? Do I remember that correctly?
Well, I mean, that we really don't have the data yet, because the EOS grade levels didn't come out until Thanksgiving of last year. There was a lot of good usage, is all over the place. Where I was really referencing was the practice forms that are out there.
Okay.
That, how much they're really teaching the items of those practice forms. Again, I have no qualms about, giving the practice form and then talking about the item, or, going through those items with the kids after it. But when a lot of people or teachers are telling me I need more items to teach, I get nervous. If you're teaching items, you're not teaching the standard. And I say that very cautiously. I don't know what the instruction really looks like and the interpretation of how they give that to me. But from a blank statement, that I jump quickly to really thinking about, wow, they're really just teaching the test items or teaching the items and not really teaching the standard about, how the standard builds and, the introduction and then, the progression and the mastery of the standard. So I always question that. And I sometimes probably shouldn't jump to conclusions, but again, some insights, and especially when you have conversations with some districts, that is what they're doing. They're teaching tests and not teaching standards or teaching their curriculum or lab. And, if you've been to any of Susan German's or trainings or whatever, you hear us really talk about it. We know that there are 3 curriculums running through that district. There's the written curriculum, the taught curriculum, and the assessed curriculum. All 3 should be pretty similar. But if you throw out the first 2 and really just thinking about the assessed curriculum, is it really doing what it needs to do? It gets kids ready for a test, but we all know forms are not always, it's not the exact same test every year. You switch up items for test security, you just can't, it wouldn't be a fair assessment. So, we got to be careful about what is the instruction really in the classroom. It should be the curriculum, and then you assess and really evaluate, what's the data telling me, and again, it should hopefully it always tells you something. And one is, it should always be patting you on the back about how great it is. And yeah, I got most of my kids that got it, they mastered it. And then it tells me, okay, I got to go back and I think I know what's wrong now. And not treat it as, well, the kids just don't know this, we'll do it again. Really give probably the good insight for where tier 2 and tier 3 start. I think about this way back when, and again, it was horrible in my class experience until I figured it out. Is I would go back, when we got our results or scores and anything, I'd always go back to the very beginning and start trying to reteach it to some of these kiddos, and they shut down on me. It's one of those, I finally realized they know that. Why did I just waste their time? It wasn't my time I got wasted. I wasted their time. I really need to find out where they're at. And then that's where we start our starting point and then move forward. So that's where I would really hope that any of the data, your assessment data, your interim data, your classroom assessment data really gives that comes into, okay, here's where I need to start. And I probably need to backtrack to this one little piece and correct that. You know, thinking about, and I'll give my poor granddaughter run her over with the bus here. She keeps struggling right now with ratio and proportions, and I hone in on that quite a bit. She keeps forgetting about in division the reciprocal. Very something simpler that started way back when, but it is just continuously just keeps creeping up and creeping up. And I got to keep reminding her, you've got to use the reciprocal when you're dividing a fraction. You have to, do this. And she'll tell me I know, and then, but we know that it's just one of those. It's a gap, something that just isn't sticking continuously. But I keep honing in on that and keep honing in on that. Hopefully it will finally get to that point where it will be part of her repertoire. So hopefully that's where you start focusing on instead of trying to go all the way back sometimes.
Lisa Hartley wants to know, will the students and accommodations entered for the testlets into the DRC carry over for MAP or EOC in the spring? In other words, once in the portal, will all of that have to be done again in the spring?
It does have to be done. They're separate data sets.
Okay. Next thing is, you had mentioned a presentation. If you have that link available, could you drop it in the chat for educators if they want to go back and take a look at the one you're referencing?
Yes, you've asked something very.
Put you on the spot. I know. Find it in your open tabs. And we're going to start wrapping up here once Shaun gets that put in the link. But are there any final thoughts, questions, comments that anyone wants to make on the call before we wrap up? Okay.
There we go.
Okay, great. If there's anyone on the call that has further questions and wants to connect with someone on Step Up, maybe we can kind of help you through some things. We're happy to do that. We have recorded this session and we'll make it available. And there, Shaun just dropped in the link. So if you want to click on that real quick so that you have it in your files.
And that is an open link through DRC and Vimeo. Vimeo or whatever it is.
Right.
So it has all of the trainings that we do with the district testing coordinators. So, that is public and open for you guys to look at, the administrators or whatever. And you'll see, our fall training, our Tesla training, our data training. So, you'll kind of see quite a bit of videos in there that you guys can go through, as you're thinking about moving towards spring. I know Lisa probably getting ramped up to think about all of our training, so you can definitely pull any of those pieces if you want. But that is an open and public. It was nothing uber secret in there.
Okay.
We
want to go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to throw out a couple of things here just real quickly. There is DTC training. The memo went out. A lot of district testing coordinators have signed up for on-site or virtual. The big memo will be coming out about the critical dates. Just to put a reminder out there that EOCs open up in March and will close on May 15th. Grade level opens on April 6th and closes on May 15th. It pushes up the window a little bit, but two things I kind of want to put out there. When we look at the testing volume, it's very small after that second week in May for most, as a state perspective, we're down to less than 3 or 5% of the population left to test. So big request from you guys is always to get the data back before you're out for vacation. The idea is you'll have right now all of your data by June 27th. And that is your ISRs, that's all of your metadata for your item analysis, your rosters, all of that data. We're trying to get that before the July 1. So especially any of you who are losing your district testing coordinator, you know, I know that's always a big crux. Somebody's leaving and then there's a gap by the time they finally find out, hey, we need to let DESE know we got somebody new. That hopefully you can get all that data in your house before 4th of July vacation. So this is why we're pushing it up the further. We don't want to push it up any further, but you never know what gets told to us. But we're definitely looking at, by the 15th, we can get you a lot of information well before July 1. So that's, start looking for that about when the data will be available.
One last question. If we test as early as possible, could we get our raw scores back on EOCs before the end of the school year to where we could use it as a grade for the kids?
So yes, sir. Make sure your district testing coordinator in February, when that window opens, to put your district testing date closing.
Okay.
I.e., so if you want to close on this date, and and something you'll see that I finally convinced them to do, they're actually going to have the date you close when your data will show up. So you'll know exactly how many business days are there. But yeah, so kind of work it back of when you need that data to put into your grade books, or you want to put your thumb down on the kiddos and say, I know what you did. Yes, do that. So, but also know that if you got kiddos who didn't make that date, you got all the way to the state window. The data will be collected. You just won't get the raw data until after the state window closes. But if you're looking for that big chunk, yes, you can close on 5 business days, or close, and then 5 business days the day after it closes, we'll get you the raw scores.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Well, I hope that you have found the information helpful today. Shaun, as always, thank you for spending your time with us. We appreciate you providing us with all the things and letting us barrage you with questions. We certainly appreciate the testlets when they're coupled with those new low leap blocks. It's really been transformative for districts to kind of get just a peek into what is proficiency. So thank you so much. I think we're going to say goodbye today, but thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.